Nice to see such a burgeoning audience. I'm sure more will come. I'd like to introduce Kelley Cheng, who I believe has a studio here in Singapore. And we're going to discuss the role of books in relation to architecture and some architects' quest for fame. We're going to hear about books, catalyst for fame. Please welcome Kelley Cheng.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, today I'm going to have a discussion, really, to discuss about the importance of having still a good monographs for architects in this day and age where everything is digital. Just a very quick introduction of the press room. So the press room is a multidisciplinary studio. Most of our works are centered on content, actually. So basically, we create content, and then we deliver them on different platforms. It can be books, it can be an exhibition, it can be digital, can be the website, etc. We also run a non-profit initiative called Studio SML. This is sort of a passion project. So it was inspired by the fact that Singapore being a very young nation, just 58 years old, a lot of our pioneer designers, architects have passed on. And there's really not an accessible platform to understand and learn about their journeys and works. So I started Studio SML 2 years ago to document creatives in Singapore. So do check it out. It's got a website where you can read all the stories. It's even got a podcast. So you can go to Spotify and you can listen to stories of Singapore creatives. So that's what I do. Okay, so let's plunge into the topic of what I want to talk about today. If you ask ChatGPT, what are the best-selling architectural monographs of all time? They will say, number 1, Frank Lloyd Wright monographs. Number 2, Le Corbusier's publications. And number 3, Rem Koolhaas SMLXL. I think 1 and 2 doesn't need any explanation. But why is Rem Koolhaas SMLXL, published in 1995, such a successful monograph? And what can we learn from it to apply those successful traits into the monographs of today, perhaps your monograph? So it is done in 1995. It's a really big block of a book, 1,344 pages. And there's not an exact figure of how many copies it has sold, but in 2006, 100,000 copies have been sold. So if we project 20 more years, I would say at least 300,000 copies have been sold, and this is definitely a bestseller in architectural monographs, undoubtedly. And to quote this lady, Nancy Nowitzki of Metropolis magazine, she said, before SMLXL, some of us haven't even heard of Rem Koolhaas or Bruce Mau. We've never seen a monograph that included porn, film stills, high Renaissance painting, nor one of such epic proportions. It was a novel on crack, a dictionary on taxonomic speed. But it changed our notion of the monograph as well as our perception of the role of graphic design. I think that really summarized very well why the book had such great appeal at that time. And it basically propelled Rem Koolhaas from architect to superstar. And the reason is because this is in a time where the internet was still quite young. There's still not a lot of digital platforms like your social media and all that. So Rem Koolhaas was the influencer of his time because you can only share random thoughts through something printed and not something on social media. So again, just to summarize some of these points that I think made it successful, innovative formats and non-linear. So in 1995, most monographs have quite a more sort of traditional approach, where the pagination is quite linear. But in the 90s, if you remember the movies of Wong Kar-wai, remember the movies of Quentin Tarantino, it's always non-linear. It runs on parallel tracks, character-driven, and it's layered. So chapter 1 can be at the chapter 5 can be read as chapter 2, so on and so forth. So SML actually has that same sort of trait where it's non-linear. And I think it was pretty much the zeitgeist of the creatives in the 90s of developing this new language of layers and also this non-linear approach to a creative narrative. And of course, bold graphic direction. Bruce Miles himself said that it is a free-falling sort of approach in his graphic approach for this book. So it feels a little bit messy if you look at it, but it is deliberate. And of course, in the book, we see Ram Koolhaas' architectural philosophy. But I think most of the time, it was really his own experiences. He even shared about his positive and negative experiences with clients and all that, which made it quite intimate. So I think that was one of the reasons why the book was very successful, because it is not a kind of like a formalistic sort of writing. When you read the book, it's as if that, Ram Koolhaas is sitting across you and bitching about this client to you, or telling you a story of what happened the other day. So that was also interesting. And then the multimedia approach, actually, I think it's more a multi-layered approach. Comprehensive content. So as some of you might know, the starting point of this whole book was actually from Ram Koolhaas' journals, his travelogues. And he actually used this as a spine for the whole book. So if you're familiar with the book, there's this A to Z sort of footnotes on every single page of the 1,344 page from A to Z. And these are all like random ramblings taken from his diary. And actually, that is the most interesting part of the book, because you really dissect his mind and know what he's thinking. So anyway, it's also a peek into an architect's mind, like an open diary, which has never been done before, So it's sort of like a memoir, and his works and everything all mashed up together. Hence, it was really refreshing during that time. It is messy, brutal, and unfiltered. And in fact, Bruce Miles, the designer, said that his friend said that the book is everything and the kitchen sink. And I just want to give an example of his unfilteredness, which is that in his chapter of XL, Ram Koolhaas actually called Singapore a Potemkin village. And I just want to read you something what it really means, because I had to Google what is the Potemkin village. So in politics and economics, Potemkin village is a construction where purpose is to provide an external facade into a situation to make people believe that the situation is better than it is. The word actually came from the 18th century, where there was this Russian empress. She wanted to tour the village, but the villages are all in shambles. So his minister, who happened to be her lover as well, wanted to impress her. So basically embellish a few villages so that he can show off to the empress. So as you can see, a very negative kind of connotation. So I think that is why the book is quite intriguing. Just like influencers like to say sort of controversial things so that it can start a conversation, or it can get people worked up or start discussing. Same thing as this book. So there were a lot of quite brutal statements and controversial things, like the way that Ram Koolhaas criticized Singapore. So while there is some truth in it, so at this point, I just want to kind of like, as a Singaporean, that yes, there are a lot of things that are manufactured in Singapore, because we are a 58-year-old country. So we started with nothing. We were a third world country. No nature, today we have man-made nature. No landmark, no Great Wall of the City, we have Gardens by the Bay. No water, we made our own water. And in fact, according to a Netflix series, Live to 100, we are the new 6 blue zone. So if all things go right, I'm going to outlive a lot of you. So to Ram Koolhaas, who said that we are Potemkin, I say Majula Singapura. We come from nothing to something. So honest and annoying at times, hate it or love it, hate it or like it. I think that's what really makes this book very interesting, and why it becomes such an iconic monograph. So what we learn from it is that while Thomas Hedjuk said that the architectural world is suffering from a blandemic, I appreciate the book SML because I think the book publishing industry is suffering from the same thing of a blandemic. We are seeing so many of this very clean, minimalist kind of look, Helvetica, top line left, and you really can't tell one monograph from another. But if you look at SML, even today, 30 years later, it is still a super unique book. So lessons learned from SML, don't do what everybody's doing. You don't need to copy that format of that book, but I think you need to find your own voice in a monograph. And you always have to take a risk, because when Ram and Bruce Mao entered into this project, initially they couldn't find a publisher. Everybody was like in shock, like how, who's going to buy this like rambling of a book? But they took a risk, and the initial phases, they self-financed it, and it really, they benefited from this risk. So from here, I want to move on to how growing up with that book and learning from it as a young architectural student, and to establishing my own sort of publishing consultancy, making architectural monographs. I would kind of summarize my philosophy in making book as form follows content. Sometimes client comes to me and then they have already ready-made content, and they say, make me a book. And it's not so fun because you can't really have a lot of room to navigate. But when clients come to me with nothing, I actually much prefer it, because they say you create a content and you make the book. And there you can actually have a much more holistic vision. So I'm going to share a few books that was done that way. This is a book that is coming soon. It's 5 years in the making. Peter Tay is a good friend of mine. He's quite a successful interior designer in Singapore. In fact, he is touted as the celebrity interior designer because he designed for a lot of celebrities. So Peter is an old friend, and he entrusted me with everything. He just said, welcome to my studio, and take anything you want, ask me anything. And through many sessions of interviewing with him, with his wife, with his clients, with different people, I started making this book very slowly. So usually when you make a book, you start with a pagination. The pagination for a bookmaker is a little bit like the floor plan of an architect. It's very much like the musical score of a musician. You need to understand the kind of music you want to make. Is it jazz? Is it a pop song? Is it a symphony? How many parts is it in? If it's a symphony, usually 3 parts. And what kind of rhythm do you want? When do you have the crescendo? When do you have the pause? And etc. So it's very much like crafting a symphony, a musical score, when you do the pagination. So learning from the book of SML, I wanted it to be a little bit layered. I want to tell, not just to showcase the work, I want to tell the story of Peter Tay. Because for me, when I make a book, it's always about finding that unique identity for that book. And if Peter Tay doesn't have a journal for me to work with, I'm going to wrangle it out of him. So hence, we did a series of a lot of interviews. We spoke with him and all that. And also, being an old friend, I knew Peter since the day he came back from Architecture Association. And you might think that, he's a celebrity designer, but that is a side of him that is very very childlike, and always, very innocent. So I want these stories to be captured inside. Hence, it is not just about the works of this designer, but it's about why he created these works, who he is as a person that led to the way he designed. So as you can see, his stories are kind of interspersed in between. It informs the different phases of what he's exploring in his design. So I actually found his very first sketchbook when he was studying in Architectural Association. And given the title Reflections, actually that title was the only word that Peter gave me. He said, you can do anything, but I want the book to be called Reflections. And, I was so lucky. I found this book that was kind of like really decrepit, a bit rotting away. And then I started flipping it. I was totally in love with it. So it became the cover because that's the beginning of Peter. And the subtitle of Reflection is The Making, and there is a bracket S of a designer. So I think I wanted that double meaning, the makings, as in his making, and also the making of him as a designer. So the play of word is also something that I enjoyed a lot when I create content. So we start with showing some of his sketches and all that. That really builds the foundation of giving you a taste of who he is. More sketches, and then we start to kind of like weave in the stories, his happiest moment, his proudest moment, etc. And then that page in his sketchbook, I absolutely love it. He just stick a Dragon Ball sticker inside, and that's really the Peter that I know, quite fun-loving and always like a kid. And okay, then so if you look at the layout of the book, these are projects, but very subtly, for all the projects, there is always a very subtle reflection. If you look at the layout, there's always somewhat symmetrical. Sometimes there's a block, or sometimes there's a text block, but they're always reflected quite symmetrically. So that is a very subtle gesture that I want to introduce to basically continue this whole concept of a reflection. And then these are some of the, again, pages where we talk a little bit more about his stories and his philosophies and all that. And then back to the projects, you see the reflection going on again. Yep. So this is a book that, look out for it. It should be finally published next year because I'm taking it quite slow because Peter is not chasing me, and so I just take my time to do this book. This is another book that I love a lot. Not architectural book, but an art book. And again, a very, very good friend of mine. Took almost 4 years to do. Again, I got the privilege of creating the content and the design for Shi Yun, my friend, contemporary Chinese ink artist. And I managed to kind of like even ask her to create a special cover for this. It is a monograph of her 18 years of work. So I wanted this stroke to be an abstract representation of her journey as an ink artist, as an artist, that a journey is always difficult, imperfect, but at the end of the day, when you open it up, it's a fold-out cover, it's still beautiful. So that was a cover that we specially created for this book. Again, the pagination, the musical score, as you can see, very non-linear, very layered. I would really say that one of the biggest takeaway for me as a designer from the Koolhaas book is really this idea of layering my book. So as much as I can, I always, when I'm allowed to do so, because not all clients love it, right? Sometimes they say very confusing. So as much as I can, I like a more layered approach to my book. So also in terms of layout, actually the concept of this book is really about the power of 6. Because it is an 18 years journey, and eventually I wanted to create it like a symphony. So there are 3 parts to the book by 6 years, 6 years, and 6 years. And so the whole book is designed on a grid of 6 mm, a grid of 6 mm. So within this 6 mm grid, you can actually move around all the pictures, the text block, and all that as elements, and no two spreads are the same. This is also kind of like a parallel to Shi Yun's way of making her art, because she always come up with a concept, a system, a framework first, and then she would add some random strokes to it. So for me, the fixed system is the 6 mm grid, and then the stroke is really where I put these things. And when you put them all together, it just looks amazing. You can't even believe that they are actually designed on a grid. Each beginning of the section, each symphony, so I want to have sort of something more melodic. So this is really a more random layout of all the artworks titled within each section of 6 years. And then for some of the pages, the pictures themselves become certain kind of interlude, where the pictures are not really blown up. So something like that is on the top right-hand corner. I think most clients would scream at me because they said, the picture too small, too small. But so what? Because this is an art book. It's art. So who cares if it's small? And look at how small. This is a 12 mm picture on each page. I absolutely love it. This is like one of my favorite spreads in the book because I can never do this with most of my other corporate clients. So basically, by moving within a 6 by 6 mm grid, you can actually create music and you can create magic. So yes. Okay, so move on to just 1 or 2 books where I have more have to work more collaborative with the client, because the last 2 books are really like 100% freehand, where I can do anything. So this is a more guided, a more collaborative sort of book. But I also had the privilege of being quite at the beginning of this project with DP Architects to document the making of a building. So this is the monograph of a building, not the monograph of a firm. So it's Dubai Mall, the biggest shopping mall in the world. Again, this is always very important for me, my pagination. I would say that the flow is a little bit more linear, a little bit more chronological, because this is a monograph of a building. But what I want to I still want to find an identity for the book, because when you do a book of one building and it's the Dubai Mall, you might not have a sensing. I think the most important message here is that how big it is. So the strategy is really, if you look at there are some popping black and orange pages. There are these infographics that I deliberately wanted to weave in to tell you how big this Dubai Mall is. It's almost like a city. So using the infographics and these are weave in between to kind of like, even if you're not reading all the body text, you get the idea how big it is. So these are all littered throughout the book, and immediately, in terms of the color and the graphics and all that, it gives a very clear identity to the whole book. This is another book that I really like, that I want to share. It's actually for the Housing Development Board of Singapore, which became privatized and was called Sabana. So as you know, Singapore has one of the most successful public housing schemes in the world. And a lot of people want to know our secret. And for Sabana, their job was also to bring forth their expertise in creating successful public housing for other countries. So when they came to me to say they want to make a monograph for HDB or Sabana, I asked them who your target audience is. And they said our target audience is government, Barack Obama, big developers. This is their target audience. So it is a very specific audience. So immediately I said, then we shouldn't do a linear showcase of all your projects, because first of all, it's too many, and not all HDB projects are pretty. They are made to be very practical, affordable, workable, but not the most pretty. So definitely we don't want like a massive sort of collection of a lot of projects. So we decided to, alongside with the client Savannah, we decided to just kind of pick one project for each type of housing that is groundbreaking for public housing. So this, in terms of the flow, very linear, but what we want to showcase, as you can see from here, is that we don't need so many pictures. It's not going to be just a picture book. But what's going to really make this book good and great is really the strategies behind these public housings. So as you can see, a lot of strategies being weaved in. So take, for example, this one. So it's about, of course, sustainable buildings and all that, which is the big topic for every architect now. We start with one project that we just have one project. So we don't even want to include like all other projects of sustainability, just the best one for sustainability. And for each chapter, we have proposed to start with one infographic that will basically share with you that why this type of housing is important. And this is for an aging world. So it's for old people. It's public housing that's designed for old people. So again, the graphic design could actually enhance sort of like the importance of a project by showing you why the world needs it right now. So on and so forth. You have projects that weave in green spaces. This is a rental project for the low income. And then urban sprawl, this is actually a redevelopment project for a HDB project. This is a new kind of a more advanced mixed development affordable housing. So this is quite new because mixed development is usually developed by private developers, but actually for the Singapore public housing, we actually have quite a lot of successful mixed developments now, including like some of you might know our Tampines Hub and all that. They are really, really advanced and very, very well done. We have condo-like public housing as well. And this is a typical sort of layout just to give you a sensing of the flow. So we will basically analyze the project, and then we will also interview the architects to give you sort of like an insight into the design process. And then what's important, as mentioned, is really the strategy. The next book that I want to talk a little bit about is the late William Lim. As you all know, he's quite a famous architectural academic. And so this is a book where he came to me with ready content. And being an architectural academic, it was actually full of writings. So everything that was given to me are essays. And how do you make a book like that interesting? So pagination, again, very linear, this one. But what we want to introduce is to have a really nice sort of illustration that summarizes the chapter for you. So these illustrations are basically, of course, created to be quite architectural, and they basically succinctly tells you what, to kind of like hint at you what the whole essay is about. The rest of it is really just good typography, and what we tried to do in this one is also, if you notice, a lot of academic books usually have a lot of endnotes. And people don't like to flip to the back of the book for the endnotes, or even footnotes to the bottom. So we actually bring the footnotes or endnotes. We don't want endnotes or footnotes anymore. We want side notes. So whenever there is a point that they want to make, you can immediately see it on the left-hand side of the supposedly footnote. So this is something that makes that as bookmaker, we understand how people use a book, and we want to make the reading experience a lot better, which I think this really kind of, works quite well. So every essay starts with a really nice infographic sort of illustration. And then, of course, there are always, we always have this kind of like pop-up quotes for very wordy essays, wordy books, because there is always a chance that people don't want to read the whole essay. But to enable them to even just have a gist of it, quotes work really well. So another layer of the typography is really weaving in these pop-up quotes to immediately give you a quick idea of what the whole essay is about without you even have to read the whole book. Okay, so lastly, I just want to share some visual works that I've done for the Singapore Architect magazine. It's a 50-year-old magazine that just went completely digital last year. It's published by the Singapore Institute of Architects, where I served as the creative director and editor-in-chief for 8 years. So again, it was very much for me about questioning what an architectural magazine could be, in the 21st century, and what architecture could be, in fact, The architecture is so much more than just buildings. Architecture is really about capturing the zeitgeist of our times. It's about our culture, it's about people, it's about music, it's about so many things. So every cover or every issue is thematically driven, and they're interpreted in so many different ways. It can be typographically, it can be illustration, it can be buildings, of course, sometimes. And in the 8 years, I'm really proud to have created a really nice collection of the Singapore Architect magazine, and basically pushing the boundaries of what an architectural publication could be. And with that, I would end my presentation. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to ask some questions or do some collaborative project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelley. So we were having a little chat beforehand, and we came up with a notion of a book actually being a form of architecture. And I think you've explained very well why that is. It seems that a useful parallel might be if you're a filmmaker when you're doing a storyboard for a film, and that you log the scenes that you imagine the film will cover.
Yes.
And sometimes there will be continuity in the film, and sometimes there'll be a break in the edit to shock or surprise or change location. Essentially, a book, and I think you're imagining in your page plans, a book is an experience of turning the pages. Am I right?
Yes.
I don't know if your microphone is still on.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes,
I
yes.
can hear you.
Yeah, so yeah, that's right.
Could you just expand a little bit on this notion of a book being an experience?
That's a fantastic question, because having been making books, for more than 25 years, and a lot of people always ask me, like, how do you, what's the experience of a book? Like, all the books feels the same to people. But I think for a bookmaker, there are so many components that can enhance the experience of a book. And the first thing that many people might not notice is the feel of the book. So the book,
what it's like as an object.
yes, exactly. When you hold it in your hand, right? How does it feel? And how we want to create the form of this book, how thick, what's the cover, how heavy, how light. It comes down to so there are different kinds of paper. Thicker paper, thinner paper, whatever. So sometimes we want it to be more blocky, we will deliberately choose a thick paper. Sometimes we want it to feel like really like nothing, then it will be a thin paper and all that. And then the size of it, whether it's going to be big, it's going to be small, it's going to be handy. So the first thing that I always look at is the feel of the book as an object, as you said, the book block. And then, of course, then it comes down to like the details. So in architecture, there's always all these details of choosing the material. white paper is not just white paper. For a bookmaker, there's 1,000 different shades of white. And
1,000
different shades of white.
different sheets of paper.
Shades of white. Different white. And you literally have...
Oh, you mean we can choose between 1,000 kinds of white?
Yes. So white is
very hard to choose then.
Very hard to choose. So that's the other thing that it's some kind of detail that we fuss over. And then, of course, it comes down to the details of the pacing.
I can't hear you. It's very difficult to hear between us, but sorry.
Yeah. So, and then it comes to the pacing, as you said, like a movie. How do you want to lead them into the narrative? Where is the climax? Where's the pause, etc. And so all these, they all add up really to the experience or the journey of flipping a book.
Often when I've worked on lots of book projects, especially I'm thinking of the catalogues for our Department of Architecture. When I was teaching at the Royal College of Art, I'd always get the communication department to propose some designers for our end-of-year book. And they were always too ambitious. They wanted fold-outs, they wanted to switch paper, they wanted special kinds of stitching. How do you actually get a book to come in within budget?
Oh, yeah. So that's another big question that
I mean, maybe of course, what happens if you've developed a book idea that's got some crucial requirements in terms of printing and folding, and then you can't afford it, your book project is sort of undermined.
Yes. Yes, that happens. So budget is, it's always something that we have to grapple with. For most of the time, most clients would always encourage us to propose first, as your design comm department would do. They would say, I want this fold out, I want this stitch and all that. So just like us, we would shoot for the stars first, and we would say that we
shoot for the stars. There's
shoot
an
for the
interesting
stars.
idea.
Yeah. So we would say we want this, we want that, we want spot UV, we want emboss, we want deboss, we want trifold cover, and then we would get a quotation from a printer, and we'll show it to the client. So sometimes, if we're lucky, the client said, yeah, go for it. But if not, then there is value engineering in bookmaking too, just like architecture.
But I would like now to come to the title of your piece, Catalyst for Fame. Now, I mean, you've obviously explained how Rem Koolhaas's book was a kind of facilitator, and it captured well his spirit as an architect, and it probably propelled him towards fame. But do you think that it's a wise thing for architects to think they're going to get famous just because they've made a book?
Very interesting question. So I think what is important to note is that for Rem, when he made the book, he was already quite famous.
He'd done Delirious New York.
Yes. So exactly, that was even before this. So he was already has a certain level of fame, and he already have 20 years of work, So I think that is a given. That is a given. So he is not like a fresh new architect, just practice for 2 years and hope to use a book to be famous. That would not work. But he already has a body of work. He already has certain reputation, and this book actually is a catalyst to propel him to even more fame. Yeah, so I think even more fame.
Do you think that's what they wanted, though, from this? Was that the intention?
I think so.
But lots of today, when we've touched on the relationship between the internet and what it means for books, to publish a book is it's become more contained. So there are fewer books probably than there were, and often a publisher wants the architect's practice to promise to buy a number of copies, say 250 copies at sort of 20 quid each. That's quite a lot of money, so that the publisher can afford to print them. And it seems to me that often those books that are, let's say, more conventional monographs than REMs, that are just basically an assembly of projects, it seems to me that they rarely have great insight into perhaps because of the way that they're thought of project by project, or perhaps because the print run is small and the publisher can't afford to promote it. But from my own experience, it seems that publishers are not that interested in monographs. Would you agree with that? And how would you come back and counter that?
Yes, I'm so
phenomenon?
Glad you bring forth that point, because actually I wanted to talk about that a little bit, but I forgot. So yes, you're right. There are a lot of publishers that create this kind of series, right? So basically it's templated. You just pay them a sum of money, or you promise to buy a certain number, and they basically it's cookie cutter. It's a cookie cutter. They don't really put a lot of effort in trying to understand your practice. You as a designer, you as an architect, or whatever, all they want to do is just to get all the materials, fit it into this template, and they just sell. This to me really is like, please don't do this. It really has no value for any architect or any designer. I've seen so many of my friends who got persuaded to buy into one of these packages, and then in the end, the book is really quite useless.
So are you then saying that it's a little bit like a client who wants to build a house, and they've probably got their own ideas about what kind of house they want, and they say to themselves, architect? Why should I bother with an architect? They only cost more money when I can do it myself. But if you publish a book yourself and you design it yourself and all of that, okay, if you're really good at it, that might be okay. But I think what you're getting at is that the world that the designer of the book can bring to you will help the book be a better device for communication. It will help pull the reader into the medium of the printed page. And I think that's a kind of important thing for people to be aware of, that a book doesn't just appear like that, and a book is more than just assembly of pictures and captions and, and then I did this project, and then I did this project.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, I think for if an architect or a designer is willing to put, it's a substantial sum of money to make a book, to kind of produce a monograph, I think it is really, for me at least, I feel it's not just about the projects that you do. It really, this is going to be your legacy, this book. This is why I feel that even though this is the digital age and all that, there is still a value in putting together a book, because at the end of the day,
a book stays forever.
Ever, yes, right? And I always get asked by clients and all that who want to make a book. They said that, hey, Kelley, should I go into the digital space? Should I do an e-book? Should I, make this into a website or whatever? And for me, it's that, okay, so what is your purpose for that? If you are expecting that you want to go into the digital space for better reach, I say forget it. Because it is so saturated. The digital space is so saturated, anybody can go in. There is zero entry barrier. So if you were to just put an e-book out there, I can promise you it's going to actually sell much worse than a physical book.
What about if you've got a really famous writer to do the introduction? Supposing Ram did the forward in your book. That does count, doesn't it? Who your author
Nigel, that is such a good point you brought up, because this is exactly the question Peter and me were discussing. Peter was saying that, hey, Kelley, if I want to, have a bigger distribution, do you think it helps if I get, someone like Ram Koolhaas to write the foreword? And my answer is yes. I say yes.
Well, Kelley, thank you so much. I think if any of you are interested in exploring a book project, here's the person to talk to. And, I think, you've offered us very significant and useful advice.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of you will produce books that might rival some of the ones we've seen, including Ram's. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you.